Next week is the final exam. The final exam will be 33 questions, multiple choice. It's 99 points, 3 points each, and you get a point for writing your name on each of the 3 pages. Okay? It'll be on everything after the midterm. Every lecture topic after the midterm. Okay? And so after the midterm, we started out with history of videotape formats, right? Mm-hmm. History of videotape formats. So let's, history of videotape formats. Okay? You need to understand that before videotape, there was still television. Television happens in this country in the 1950s, regular broadcasts, and what they're broadcasting is live television. So like we do inside, we can record a show, or we can just watch a show being produced and being covered by the cameras and watch the signal coming off of the cameras through the switcher, and we could select which shot is best. But if it's not recorded, no one ever sees it, right? And whatever is done for that particular moment in time, and it's gone forever, unless we record it. In the 1950s, there was no such thing as videotape. So television was comprised of just a live signal, recording with cameras and sending the signal out live. So game shows, sporting events, award shows, speeches, portions of the news were just live replay. And entertainment would be like theater for television. It would be like a small theater. And people would do plays or dramatizations or comedic routines and everything, for a studio audience. But that's not being recorded. It's live. So cameras would look at that. They set cameras up to reproduce those images, and it would go out over the airwaves. People would receive it on their TV sets at home. There weren't many TV sets at that point, but people that had television sets would receive those signals. But once it's done, it's done. It's gone. What they did play back on television were movies. Movies have been around now since what? Since the late 1800s, early 1900s. So they would play back film on television. And basically, it's a video camera looking at a projection screen that's projecting a film. And that would be playback for the 1950s on television. So something that was already shot, produced, edited, scripted, the works, a film. But playback doesn't happen until the 1960s in this country with the implementation of 2-inch open reel video. We talked about this in class, so it's a whole hour of it. So you got 2-inch open reel video. The advantages and disadvantages. The main advantage is that we have a new format now we can play back from. Instead of using the old films, we can cover these sporting events, record them, play them back. These game shows, record them, play them back. We can cover these speeches and all sorts of live events, record them, rewind the tape, and then play them back on the air at different points in time during the week. Great. The problem is that this format, this 2-inch open reel format, there was no editing capability. In other words, they couldn't fast forward, shuttle motion. In other words, when you watch something in shuttle motion, fast forward or rewind, you could watch it go fast, but you could see all the images only in a faster time. Or backwards, you can't pause. And so those things, you need to do, those functions are really required to edit. So you couldn't edit. So, you could not edit 2-inch video. Sure, they tried to take a razor blade to it and edit like they edit film, but when you hold up 2-inch videotape, or any videotape for that matter, you hold it up, you can't see frames on the tape. You just see, brown, which is iron oxide particles, rust, adhere to acetate. We'll get to that later. So that's all you're seeing. So you can't see a frame and cut it with a razor blade and cut frames out and tape frames in. But they tried to do it that way anyway. But what the outcome was very sloppy edits, missed frames and things like that. So it really didn't work. So again, the major significance of 2-inch video is that there's this new format that we could play back immediately. With film, you cannot play back immediately. You have to record the film. You have to process the film. It goes to a developing stage, et cetera, et cetera. It takes time, and time is money. With video, you record, rewind, play. And you just play back what you've just seen. So this has been happening now since the 1960s. Okay, 2-inch open reel. Now, in the late 60s, we have the 1-inch open reel tape, which changes everything. In other words, you can edit this format. You can edit this format electronically. So engineers were looking at this and saying, okay, we figured out a way of recording video with color and sound. Now let's do this format, this newer format that will enable the users to edit just like they would edit film. But not just like, not cutting with a razor blade, re-recording portions of it to a new tape. And so this is where the whole television business really takes off. Because now into the 1970s, you have all the sitcoms, that start this revolution of shows that were produced on 1-inch video, edited on 1-inch video, and aired from 1-inch video. And all these sitcoms are still on TV today. They're all the reruns. Three's Company, All in the Family was one of the first ones. The spin-offs of All in the Family, Jefferson's Good Times, Maude. So all these shows from that era, came out of this new technology. And this started a new revolution in television production. Because now you have recording for video, which is different than recording for film, or performance and producing for video is different than performance and producing for film. So when you're watching television today, you're seeing films that were produced in the traditional fashion, and you're seeing video that's produced in their newer fashion. So 1-inch video changes everything. And everything after 1-inch video is always measured up to, the sophistication of 1-inch video. Is the color as good as 1-inch video? Then it's broadcast quality. Is the sound as good as 1-inch video? Then it's broadcast quality. So all the other formats thereafter. Now in the late 1970s, or actually mid-1970s, we have this 3/4-inch cassette format. This 3/4-inch cassette format. Okay? This 3/4-inch cassette format is no longer an open reel. It looks like an audio cassette. You're still familiar with audio cassettes, right? Only it's much bigger. It's about that big and that thick. It's a big, cumbersome tape. But the take-up reel and the supply reel for the tape are enclosed. And the machine that uses this format is much smaller now. The machine is about maybe 2 or 3 feet across by 2 or 3 feet wide. So it's portable. And the main reason why this was developed, this format, was for ENG purposes. Remember, ENG purposes are electronic news gathering. Know the acronym. ENG, electronic news gathering. Electronic news gathering. It's going to be on a test. It's a field producing style. It's documentative in form. It's news. But because up until this point in time, while video is being developed, 1-inch reel, 2-inch reel, news is still using 16mm film. And the reason why they're still using 16mm film is because the film cameras are small. They're about this big. It's easy for a reporter and a camera person and an audio person to go up 5 flights of stairs to do an interview with an old elderly woman that witnessed a crime, down in the street. But you can't lug a 1-inch tape machine at the time would be maybe half the size of this table, or a 2-inch tape machine at the time would be maybe half the size of this room in the 1960s. But in the 1970s, a 3/4-inch cassette machine was developed, so you can go on location and bring the machine with you wherever you're doing these recordings to bring that realistic view to the home audience. So 3/4-inch cassette format was a portable format developed mainly for ENG purposes. But it's used for some other style of shooting called EFP. That's called electronic field production. Electronic field production. That's fictional. That's fiction. These people shooting 1-inch sitcoms are saying, hey, We're always in the studio. We can go out on location now. Let's use this 3/4 inch format, go shoot a scene in the park, take it back to the studio, bump it up to 1-inch video, and edit it into the program. Because the reason why everything is, you don't want everything shot in the studio is to make it look more real if you go to different locations. And so this developed this electronic field production format or style of shooting, which basically, this is fictional, electronic field production. Remember the F, field production, means fictional in your mind, like a little mnemonic device. Electronic field production is fiction. And an electronic news gathering, the N is for news. So one's for news, documentary style or documentative informed, and the other one is fictional informed. But they're both portable formats because of this 3/4 inch development. They're both shot out on location, not in the studio. And it makes it easier to shoot on location because of the size of the machine. Now, let's fast forward to the 1980s, like that. Fast forward to the 1980s. In the 1980s, we have now the 1/2 inch cassette format, which is Betacam. This looks very much like a VHS tape. You remember VHS tape from your childhood, right? It looks very much like a VHS tape. It's a little bit fatter and a little bit shorter, but the width of the tape in that cassette is 1/2 inch wide. And what's happening professionally now is people are using this Betacam video format for news, for field production, for all sorts of all sorts of television productions. It is a Betacam, short for camcorder, meaning the tape fits in the camera. So that eliminates the need for a separate person carrying a separate machine in the 3/4 inch style. Right? The microphone's on the camera. We eliminated an audio person recording separate audio. So this Betacam style, which is happening in the 1980s, is a 1/2 inch cassette, closed cassette format. And there's a lot of material still out there that's on Betacam. There's another question. Most of the video you see on television, video playback you see on television today, is probably Betacam or something coming off of a hard drive or of a server. There are other formats after Betacam we will talk about in the 1990s, but nothing is so ubiquitous, meaning everywhere, as Betacam. Because in that 10 years, Sony and Betacam were synonymous with television production. They produced cameras and all sorts of formats to make this happen. So what you see on television today, if it's a video playback, it's probably, like I said, Betacam or Betacam upgraded to or stored on some sort of a hard drive, and then from the hard drive it gets loaded to a server, and the server will play it on the air depending on when it was paid for to be played at some point in time on the air, so you watch it at home for the consumer. Also what happens in the 1980s, we talk about this with the other lecture, which I'll talk about next, is the technology explosion, the miniaturization explosion, the outsourcing of manufacturing, which allows these products to be mass produced. So now we have both a professional, a pro side and a consumer side to the market. Professional, we're doing Betacam. On the consumer side, we're developing VHS, right? And then the subformats, SVHS, which is a higher quality, VHS-C, which is a smaller tape that fits in a regular VHS player, but VHS. On the professional side, you have Betacam, you have DVC Pro, which is a 1/2 inch cassette format. Then you go down to DVC Pro. Then you go to hard disk recording. Hard disk recording. And this is getting into the 1990s and now into 2000s. On the consumer side, there's all these different types of consumer marketing wars going on between Sony and Panasonic and other manufacturers. VHS is basically Panasonic and JVC. Sony comes out with the 8 millimeter a palm quarter. Then Panasonic and JVC come out with VHS-C, etc. You don't have to know all the specifics. What you need to know is the highlights. 1960s 2-inch tape, late 60s 1-inch tape. It starts the 70s situation comedy revolution. In 1970s 3/4-inch tape. Two shooting styles, ENG, EFP, developed because of this cassette format, or were more likely to succeed because of this 3/4-inch format, or easier to do. And then in the 1980s, we have the half-inch Betacam camcorder cassette format, and then we have a split in the market where we have both a professional side of products being released, and we have a consumer side of products being released. Follow what I'm saying? And now today, it's pretty much tied together. We have flash memory recording, like in your phone. You have a little card you stick in your phone. It allows you to record video or audio, and you could upload that. And it could be a high-resolution recording, depending on how you set, your phone or your recording device or your camera. Or it could be a low resolution. If it's a lower resolution recording, it'll record more information or store more information. If it's a higher resolution recording, it has less space, but it's a higher resolution. Almost as good, in some cases, just as good as a professional recording in a television studio, in a professional facility, etc. So, how it splinters off in the 1980s and through the 90s and into the 2000s, it comes back together again. From hard disk recording or direct to DVD recording on the professional side, then hard disk recording, then uploading to a server. That's what's going on today in the 2000s. Or on the consumer side, going from half-inch format VHS and then SVHS and 8mm playback. Remember, this stuff, the consumer side, is to document family evolution. In the 1950s and 60s, that was being done through 8mm film. But film has its inherent problems. You need to know about film. You need to know how to expose the film, but what length of time to expose the film to light. Otherwise, you ruin the film. So here you go, shooting someone's birthday party, and you don't know if the light's too bright, the light's too dark, unless you really study and learn how to use the lens and the aperture and learn how to buy film to match the light setting that's going to take place in that environment. It's like a hit or miss. So if you look at your parents' home videos, which are probably film transferred to video, some of them are really light, some of them are really dark, some of them are moving faster or slower than real time, because that's the limitations of the machine that was playing back the film when it was being transferred, or maybe the projector, the camera they were using, was the limitations of the camera. But that's all changed, because now with VHS, you have your camcorder, then your palm quarter, and now your camera phones or your portable cameras that shoot still pictures and also shoot video. It's all changed. It's all coming into one arena. So again, I spent a whole hour on little aspects of this, but I'm not going to do that now because this is a review for the final. These are the important things you need to understand. 2-inch video, 1-inch video, situation comedies, 1970s, 3/4-inch, portable ENG, EFP, half-inch cassette format in 1980s, professional side, consumer side, and what we see on television today mostly is an evolution of a Betacam, which is uploaded or transferred to a hard disk storage and then uploaded or accessed through a server. Things that are shot today are shot directly to some sort of hard disk format in a camera or on a recording device, a computer recording device. Okay, we're good? Move on to the next one. The next one I talked about video editing, right? I think video editing. Video editing was just like fancy dubbing. What that means simply is re-recording your camera originals, portions of your camera originals, to a new tape. And that new tape is called your edited master. So you have your source tapes, which are your source tapes or recordings. You may have several of them. Like I said, I do an interview with one student, I do an interview with another student, I do an interview with another student, another student, another student, all on separate tapes in their own environments, maybe at their home or in their work or their choice of play, where they go. And then I'm going to take samples or snippets of each of those responses from the various students and tie them together. And while I'm doing that, I'm building a new tape. A new tape is called a edited master. So edited master is the compilation of snippets. Edited master is just short little pieces of source tapes, short little pieces, snippets, if you will, of the source tapes, arranged in a certain order for playback. Meaning so the home audience or the person you're going to present this to can understand a story. Maybe the common thread in the narrative is, what students do, where students work after school, where Mercy College students work after school, where Mercy College Media Studies students work after school. You got to hone it down. And who may babysit, who may work at a department store, who may work at a pharmacy, who may work doing side jobs, who may work, But that's the narrative, the thread that holds the whole narrative together. So I may have like 4 or 5 interviews with you guys, 4 or 5 different tapes. Those are my source tapes. And I'm going to take just little portions of your answers and string them together on a new tape. And my new tape is called the edited master. Now notice I'm throwing the word tape around because that's where it started. We were editing tape. But today we're not editing tape. So when you're editing tape, we call that linear editing. And computer editing is nonlinear. Understand the difference, the concept between linear and nonlinear. Linear just means straight line. Going forward or backward, you're moving in a straight line. So if I do an interview with student 1, student 2, and student 3, and then I decide I want to take student 2's answers away and go from student 1 to student 3, in a linear tape, I have a hole, and I have to fill that hole with something. Another interview, perhaps, but it's got to measure up the same size. It's like digging a hole in the ground. You're left with a hole. When you want to fill the hole, what do? You put dirt back in the ground so it's level again. If you put more dirt, it's too high, you're going to trip. If you put not enough dirt, it's too low, you're going to trip. There's still going to be a little hole. That's like linear editing, digging a hole. Computer-based editing is nonlinear, which means I can take interview 1, take out interview 2, and enter interview 3, and no one will ever know. My edited master, when the people see my final, they will see interview 1 and then interview 3 and never know that interview 2 existed. Because you're not working in a straight line, non-linear. It's like the way we think. We tend not to think in a straight line. But the way we communicate in a straight line. I have to start from the beginning of my lecture, middle, and end of my lecture. The semester starts beginning, middle, and end, and there are learning goals throughout and course objectives throughout. I just don't jump to the end and expect you to know everything. That's not realistic. So our communicative process is linear. It's in a straight line. But when our communication using media, can be nonlinear, how we create it. But if I use a word processor to write an article for a paper or a computer program, right? I take out paragraph 2, and now paragraph 3 becomes paragraph 2. They never knew that. The reader never knew that. But I knew it. Because I was trying to create this message in a linear fashion. But I was editing in a nonlinear fashion. Saying, I don't like paragraph 2. Take paragraph 2 out completely. It doesn't make sense. Cut it out, highlight it, hit the space bar, it's gone. That's nonlinear editing, even on your computer, or when you're writing your essays and your papers. But when you write an essay out by hand, you're stuck in a linear pattern. It's like when you take a test and the professor gives you blue booklets and you got to scratch out that sentence because you don't want that sentence part of the flow, part of the narrative flow. You may reintroduce that sentence later on, or you may not. But at the end of your test, of your blue book essay, you have all these scratch marks. And it's your thought process that's nonlinear, trying to fit into a linear pattern so the reader, the consumer, that's going to look at the edited master is going to understand. So we communicate in a very linear fashion, but we think in a nonlinear fashion. Computer-based video editing allows us to edit in a nonlinear fashion. It allows us to have random access to our footage. I can go to my first interview and say, you know what, I want to go to my 7th interview. And as long as I have them labeled, I know go to my 7th interview. I don't have to fast forward the tape. Back in the tape, I fast forward to get to my 7th interview. We take one tape out, put the other tape in. That's all linear stuff. Once my interviews are done, my 7 interviews are done, they're labeled interview 1, interview 2, interview 3, interview 4. And I want to go to my 7th interview, I just click on 7 in the file, it opens up and it starts to play. So that's nonlinear. Do you understand the difference between linear and nonlinear? You understand how we think nonlinearly, but we edit and we communicate. I'm sorry, we don't edit, we communicate in a much more of a linear fashion, in a straight line. So you need to understand the difference really about video editing. That's what that whole lecture was about. Many of you have video editing programs at home and you kind of know that. There's a virtual timeline on the computer editing window. There's a timeline, but it's virtual. It doesn't really exist. Okay, and you have editing clips here, you have another clip here, you have another clip here, another clip here, and you say, guess what, I want to take this one out. And what happens is you can tie these two pieces together so when it plays back, it plays this clip, and then it jumps to this clip, but seamlessly. You don't see the transition. It cuts right after that. You're taking the timeline and putting them together. Now, if this was a tape or a film strip, it's impossible. You make a cut here, and then you have a space here. Well, I'm sorry, with a film strip, let me backtrack. With a film strip, if you cut with a razor blade, yes, you take that out and then you tape these two ends together and then you just made a nonlinear edit, but you did it in real time. But in videotape, if you do that, you're left with a hole and you have to fill that hole with something else. So when you get to the computer-based editing, the nonlinear editing style, you eliminate a clip and then you could take these two areas and tie them together, and then when you play it back as an edited master, the home audience never knew that there was a clip that existed here because they're seeing clip 1, clip 2, and right after clip 2, it starts to play clip 4. Immediately, with no jump or anything like that. So that's nonlinear editing versus linear editing, editing in a straight line. Like I said, we communicate in a linear fashion, but we think in a nonlinear fashion. Editing now is nonlinear. We're able to do that with our word processors and with our computer-based video editing programs or our computer-based audio editing programs. We can skip around. We can skip around and cut things in, put things in and take things out. Okay? Because we're still using tape, and we're also, in the other classes, we're using a hard disk recording, but in this class we're still using tape, you just need to understand what's going on with the tape. The tape itself is just iron oxide particles. Iron oxide particles are just rust. It's just rust. It's just a fancy name for rust, okay? Rust scattered on this acetate. And then when the tape goes by a record head, it's magnetic, and it aligns these particles in a certain way that represent light and color and sound and tracks. 2 tracks of audio, a track of video, and an address track. Audio 1, audio 2, and video. Then the playhead reads these iron oxide particles the way they were arranged to represent light, video, sound, color, etc., and so forth. But this is a magnetic medium. In other words, if you pass a magnet across this tape, you will rescatter these iron oxide particles, these rust particles, because rust is magnetic. Now, today, when you record something to a disc, a DVD disc or an audio disc, it's a optical process where it's burning, ones and zeros. It's burning pits into the disc. A laser is, and those pits are representing a series of ones and zeros, which are a computer language in which the disc player is a mini computer that's playing back or deciphering that computer language back to an analog fashion, so we can see color, light, sound, and hear sound, etc. So, if you run a magnet over a DVD, nothing's going to happen to it. But if you run a magnet over an audio cassette or a video cassette or a videotape, yeah, something's going to happen to it. It's going to restructure. It's going to erase the tape. Now, on the tape we use inside, we use this mini DV tape, which has 2 audio channels. So does 3/4 inch tape for that matter. It's 2 audio channels. And I gave the example in class. I said to you, take this marker and deliver it to the main hall, 3rd classroom on the left. You would go run there, and when you're in the building, you're out of breath, and you might not realize how many classrooms on the left. You might have missed one, and walk into the 4th classroom. And that's like control track editing. But if I said to you, take this pen and deliver it to room 201, 1st floor of the main hall, you jog over to the main hall, take this pen, and count 198, 200, 201, stop, and go into that room, because that door has an address. Well, each frame in video in this time code, SMPTE time code editing, has an address. And so when you want to mark an in point or an out point when editing, it is exact. The machine always goes back to that point. But it's not a machine now, it's a software process. The software always goes back to that point in time on the video and either cuts it out or cuts something into it, or develops a graphic, or whatever you decide to do at that point in time. So, let's do a quick review of the video editing. It's just fancy dubbing. You have source tapes. From your source tapes, you have your edited master. The edited master is what the home audience is going to see. The edited master has rearranged little bits and pieces from various source tapes. Okay? When editing tape, we call it linear editing, editing in a straight line. When editing with a computer, we call it nonlinear editing, which is like random access to your clips. There's one more thing. When editing with tape, we have something called a glitch. A glitch in tape editing means no no control track, no control. A glitch in tape editing means no control track. And if you don't have a control track in tape editing, the machine stops. So it doesn't stop. It doesn't count any pulses. It loses track of what frames it's looking at. Same thing with time code. If you have time coded tape and there's no time code, the time code drops out for whatever reason. The machine loses track of where it is. The tape doesn't know where your input is and where your output is. It loses. It's like a guide for the video in the actual computer program, or a guide for the video on the tape machine. So if you hear SMPTE time code, that's a frame accurate process of editing using the 8-bit digital linear code. If you have a control track editing system, which you probably don't have anymore, it's an older thing. It's phased out probably about 5 years ago, but it's still in. I see some places still use it. It's control track. It's not frame accurate, but they're good for rough cuts, doing quick edits. Not having to tie up a computer, or just do machine to machine editing. Okay. Tapes are made up of iron oxide particles. When it plays by the record head puts out a magnetic field that aligns these iron oxide particles in a certain way with tracks on them: audio 1, audio 2, video, and address track. And the video track has frames, the address track has pulses or time code on it, and audio has either music on one track or dialogue on the other, or dialogue on both tracks, etc., etc. So in the editing process, you could go in and alter just channel 2 audio and not channel 1, or just alter video and not audio, or vice versa. That's the whole idea. Incidentally, we have an editing class this summer, term B. It starts in June 1st. It goes to the end of June 31st. We have another one running probably in the spring semester, but this is really important. This class is just as important, I think, as fundamentals of television production. Because once you learn production, like you've learned in this class in the live studio, now you learn how to edit, and now you have the 2 major tools you need to conceptualize video, editing, shooting, going on location, shooting in the studio, manipulating things. So if you're interested, it's this summer. Actually, next month it starts, and it lasts only for a month. It lasts only for a month. Okay, next thing, we started after this, we went to TV technology lecture, right? TV technology lecture. Our TV technology lecture consisted of how a signal gets to your home. And you have different ways of picking up that signal. You can pick it up through, some people have cable, some people have a dish, some people have some sort of telephone system like fiber optic, Verizon, or something like that, coming into their home, and that's how they receive it. But satellites, cable, TV, subscription, TV, satellite master antenna system, dish network, or direct dish network, and what else I have? Multi-point distribution service, multi-point distribution service, and then we have low-power TV. Okay, and there was a bunch of words that I attached to this in your notebook. You should have them. When we're talking about a satellite, we're talking about a satellite that orbits the Earth 22,300 miles above the Earth's equator. That's called a geosynchronous. Geosynchronous orbit. On a satellite, we have what? We have transponders. We have, what did I say, 24 transponders on a communication satellite? Yes? It's in your notes? 24 transponders. Transponders are what? Are like channels. They're like audio and video receivers of information. So a communication satellite has basically 24 transponders or 24 channels that can receive a signal and transmit a signal to another location. We talked about what a footprint, coverage of a satellite. Theoretically, 3 satellites can cover the whole Earth. There are hundreds of satellites up there, put up there by the United States and other countries for all sorts of purposes, weather, military, surveillance, communication, cell phone, all sorts of things going on. But a footprint basically is coverage. Talks about coverage. And basically 3 satellites could cover the Earth. The other definition for footprint we talked about was a geographical place on Earth that can sustain the weight of an uplink or a downlink tower. Right? You just can't put a tower anywhere. The Earth has got to be solid enough so it doesn't eventually sink into the Earth. So footprint, that's the other definition for footprint. It's a place where you can put something, a tower that has a lot of weight. So footprint deals with coverage, signal coverage, also deals with a geographical place on Earth that can sustain the weight of a tower. 24 transponders. We also with satellites, we're talking about uplink. I mentioned uplink and downlink tower. Again, this is in the diagram in your notes, so you should have it already. I'm going through it very quickly. Uplink tower sends a signal to the satellite. The downlink tower receives the signal from the satellite. And then the signal travels in line of sight to the home antenna, right? In line of sight to the home antenna. And that's our broadcast system. Broadcast. Definition for broadcast, remember, was one signal to as many people as possible for free. Broadcast. If you buy a TV, plug it into your wall outlet, your electrical outlet, and put up the rabbit ears on your TV, you should be able to receive free television. Channel 2, Channel 4, Channel 5, Channel 7, Channel 9, Channel 11, Channel 13, 21, 41, 47, and maybe 68. free. Just buy the TV. So those airwaves are regulated by the Federal Communications Commission, by our government, which is set up for the people, by the people to regulate the system, so we don't put things on there that anybody can see at any point in time. So you don't know if a 2-year-old child is in the room or someone that's incapable of understanding what they're watching. So you have to regulate what's on the broadcast channels. That's different than narrowcast, which I'll get to eventually, but while we're doing broadcast, narrowcast is knowing more about your home audience. It's one signal to as many people as possible, usually for a fee, right? Usually for a fee. In other words, you pay for a service like your cable or your subscription, or you pay for that service, so you know what's on the channel. If you don't like what's on the channel, you don't have to subscribe to it. But it's a narrowcast. It's not open to anybody. It's open to only specific people that are paying for the service. It's a narrowcast. Okay, this class is somewhat of a narrowcast. This lecture is not going to everybody. It's going to just the people in this class. So it's a narrowcast. So you got satellite, 22,300 miles above the Earth's equator in a geosynchronous orbit. Geosynchronous means it keeps up with the Earth's rotation as it's spinning, right? Because the satellite's always got to be at a fixed place in the sky. In order for the satellite always to be there, while the Earth is turning, the satellite has to move to keep up with the Earth's rotation. Because the satellite is moving and the Earth is you're here looking that way, you're not going to be able to see the satellite. So geosynchronous, the satellite's keeping up with the Earth's rotation. 24 transponders, they're communication channels on a satellite. Footprint is a coverage of a satellite. Also, a place on Earth that could sustain one of these uplink or downlink towers. An uplink or downlink tower is a place where the signal is sent to the satellite. Uplink, downlink is where it's received from the satellite. And in line of sight means the signal is somewhat visible from the downlink tower to your home antenna in this broadcast system. We have other words that we use. I said translator when I did this lecture. Translator is an amplifier of an audio-video signal. Translator, Translator, is an amplifier of an audio-video signal. Earth station. Earth station is a place where the signal originates from. In other words, before it goes to the uplink tower, it comes from an Earth station, goes to the uplink tower to the satellite to the downlink tower, then in line of sight to your home, but it also gets collected by a translating tower, that signal, and then gets transmitted even further so other people can see it in line of sight. Okay. Next. I know, satellite's the biggest thing, Next, because all these other things are developed because of the inadequacies of satellite coverage. Cable TV, the original purpose of cable TV was developed to bring people in line of sight programming, broadcast programming, to people that were not in line of sight. So cable TV's been around for years, like a long time. I would think the first systems were set up probably in the early 60s to bring people broadcasting. They're paying taxes into the system, but they're not receiving the free television. So therefore, what happens is cable television is developed to try to wire these homes so we could send them channels, send them basic services. We use it though in major markets again after the 1980s. The explosion of the development of the computer chip and the mass production and outsourcing markets and things like that. To make these products cheaper for us to consume, we use it since the 1980s as alternative to broadcasting. Cable is an alternative to broadcasting. So we have all sorts of competition. We have Cablevision, TCI. We have telephone company, television like Verizon's in the business as well. And depending on where you are in the country, there are different companies that are data providers. They call data television, they call it phone service, they call it computer service. It's all one thing. What's different, in the cable system setup, you have something called a head end. and then hubs, and then coaxial cable. In other words, a cable system might use a satellite, but when it gets to the downlink, the signal, it goes to a head end, which is a master control area, using coaxial cable, and then it gets wired out to the hubs with the individual locations using coaxial cable, and then from the hubs it gets wired into your neighborhood. From your neighborhood it goes either underground through the city streets or up above the ground on the telephone poles to your private home. So that's where the coaxial cable comes into play. But a cable TV system may still use a satellite to transmit its signal. But the coaxial cable comes into play after it's received by the downlink, the signal is received by the downlink, and then it gets wired. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of miles of wire under the ground or over on the telephone poles to get those signals to your home. Okay, so that's what's going on. So the original purpose of cable TV was to bring people in line of sight programming that were not in line of sight. What we use it now, or from the 1980s on forward, basically is as alternative programming, and that's why you have cable channels with specialty channels, because you're paying for it. There's an audience that wants a movie channel or several movie channels, action, adventure, woman, adult, you name it. There's music channels, all different types of music channels. There's weather channel, travel channel, news channels, you name it. Okay, and that's all being provided by specialty narrowcast cable TV programming in major markets today. Next down the line, we have subscription television. Subscription television was really popular in the 1980s, where people didn't have cable TV and they were not in line of sight. People didn't have cable TV and they were not getting this alternative programming. They called it wireless cable. So you would get your HBO through an antenna, or your Showtime channel through an antenna, and it would require a special tuning box and a descrambling box and a special antenna on your rooftop, and it would be wired to a channel on your TV set. Satellite master antenna system was basically the same principle, only this was set aside for larger areas like apartment buildings. Or private houses with plenty of land around it. You've driven upstate or out of the state and you see these private homes with all this land and there's a gigantic satellite dish in their backyard. Well, that's a satellite master antenna system. What it's doing, it's looking at the signal coming right off the satellite and it's feeding it into the home. And they're paying the satellite company to do that. Okay? In an apartment building, each apartment is wired to a massive satellite dish on the rooftop. And it's wired into each apartment in the home. And you pay for that through your rent. Next is direct dish network, which is having a satellite dish on your rooftop. The dish is about maybe 15 inches and is round, or 2 feet, almost 2 feet round. And the main thing about this is you become the downlink. Wherever you are, in your home, wherever the dish is, it's looking at the satellite and it's getting the programming off that satellite, and you're paying the satellite company rent to do that. The person comes and looks at the visibility to the sky and makes a determination if by putting a dish facing this way they will receive the satellite signals from that satellite. You're eligible for that satellite signal if you pay for it. But what this does is it allows you to receive programming directly from the satellite instead of going through somewhere else. So the signal's cleaner. Multi-point distribution service is a special program, specialty programming. Board of Education used it. Hotels or hotel chains. Ships, cruises, medical colleges use this sort of thing. This is point-to-point video communication. Like what we use Skype for today. Think of Skype, but Skype is a much more lower resolution version of this. Okay, but it's point-to-point communication. And last is low-power TV. Low-power TV uses regular conventional TV. TV frequencies, and it transmits in a 15 to 25 mile radius. And what that does is it's set aside for rural areas that you can't build a television facility, or you cannot get a signal to. Like I said to you, in the late 1980s, there were about 14,000 low-power TV stations, and about 12,000 of them were in Alaska. It gives you an idea of what this was about. But it only transmitted in a 15 to 25-mile radius because you're only interested in a very, very narrow-cast audience, a very select group of people. So it was maintained by the town. It was networks financed the operation, but the town people maintained it. So any live programming that was produced on a low-power TV system was basically had to do with the local town. The other thing was trying to get the signal in from the outside world into that town. So they'd have an earth station, they would have an uplink tower in that town. But because of Dish Network, this low-power TV thing, I think, is not as ubiquitous as it used to be in areas that were not able to receive programming. Because now the dishes are much smaller, and you could put a dish on your rooftop and angle it to the sky to pick up the satellite that's there. Again, I know I went through it rather quickly, but you have all of this in your notes. So you have, last thing but not least is TV station operations. All of the departments at a TV station, or departments at a TV station, ops. What was the first thing I said last week? Sales, right? Sales. Sales generates the revenue for the whole operation. Without sales, you don't have it. Understand the difference between local sales and national sales. Local sales are much cheaper. National sales are much more expensive. National commercials go across the country, where local commercials are only for a specific local area. A commercial costs more or less depending on the time of day it's airing. Consider primetime viewing schedules. A primetime viewing schedule, for the country is between 7 and 9 p.m. So any shows that are airing between 7 and 9 p.m. at night are in a primetime viewing time slot, and therefore advertising costs a little bit more during those times. You take the same commercial. What are you drinking? What kind of tea? Sweet something. What are you drinking? Trade Winds? Trade Winds commercial may cost more money during the prime time, 7:30 at night or 9 or 8:30 at night, than it does at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Same commercial, same length, only it's airing at a different time during the day. Also, if it's a commercial's airing during a very popular program that's highly rated, it's going to cost more as well. But all this money makes the whole thing work. Without the sales, we don't have this whole operation. You can argue that you watched public television, but public television still has commercials. They do it in a different way. In the beginning of a program, they'll tell you who the program's funded by. It's usually several corporations or foundations or grants. It's still a commercial for those people, right? Same thing, it's a little bit different, so it's structured a little bit different. Then you have your traffic department, right? Your traffic department inserts the commercials in the time slots in which they were supposed to play back. They get the information directly from the sales department. Sales department tells them we negotiated with Trade Winds to air certain spots, during the day. So now the commercials are made through an advertising agency and campaign. They hire a production company to produce the television commercial. They hire directors, camera people, etc., editors, and that sort of thing. They got the commercial in hand, and then it goes into a server, and it uploads and it plays at certain times in a 24-hour clock, 7 days a week. Once it plays, the next day the traffic people come in, they look at the printout to see if everything played when it's supposed to, and then they bill the clients to pay us because we aired your commercial when we said we were going to air your commercial, according to that agreement. So that's all the traffic department does, really. It's making sure the traffic between the commercial, when they were scheduled, when they were supposed to air, if they air, and billing. Traffic department. What was next?